You know, I'd be more impressed being on the Time magazine list of the 100 most influential people if Lady Gaga wasn't ahead of me. But it's okay. I didn't have to sing to get there, so. I appreciate the chance to address you, and this is going to be a little different conversation than the one that I usually have. I can deliver an hour-long speech on the history of the municipal pensions and our pension. Usually what I talk about is what's going on in the city of Houston. I love to talk shop, and I do it on a regular basis. When I asked if I would be the keynote speaker today, I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? I really don't think a State of the City speech would be necessarily appropriate. And to a room full of advocates for housing and to ending homelessness, I don't need to stand up and talk about the details of what the city is doing or what policies we should invoke. And they said, give a personal story and talk about why you, Mayor Parker, are interested in the issue of homelessness. Well, I am interested in the issue of homelessness because as mayor of Houston, I recognize that it is a problem for some of my constituents and I need to address it. I'm interested in the issue of homelessness as a compassionate human being because in a rich city in the richest country in the history of the world, we shouldn't have homelessness. But I also have a personal connection which has helped inform my views on homelessness and why I care so much about it. If you go to the city's website, in fact, Melanie read it. It says that Kathy and I have 2 adopted daughters and a son. And since we adopted our girls while I was in office 10 years ago, and we adopted older kids, they are now 17 and 22, almost done, 17 and 22. But it wasn't a public. They were somewhat public, and people get to that and the son, and where did that come from? Well, we do have a son. He is 36 years old, and when I met him, probably 23 years ago, he was living on the streets of Lower Westheimer. I don't normally talk about him, not because I'm not proud of him, but kids of public officials get so little privacy anyway that I don't want to embarrass him, but I am very proud of him. And so in response to the invitation, I'm going to speak about him a little. This was the early 90s. As if you listen to the litany from Bob Bury of all the things that the coalition has done, homelessness is something that has ebbed and flowed. The numbers shoot up, we fight them down, the numbers shoot back up again. In the early 90s, we had a particularly bad problem with homeless youth in the Montrose area. And as a civic club president and as someone who was active in the gay community, I was involved in many of the outreach efforts to get those kids into housing if possible, get them into groups. I regularly spoke to groups of homeless kids, got to know a number of them by name, worked to, most teenagers either thrown away or runaway teenagers, they support themselves through survival sex. And so you have to deal with issues of STDs in addition to, just finding places for them to get food, finding a place for them to stay. Well, there was a young man who I had met on the streets a few times, seen at gatherings where I gave the pep talk about how you too can make something of yourself. And in last year, 20 years ago, so it would be 21 years ago this June, I was actually at the Gay Pride Festival and Parade, prior to the parade starting, late June. And the young man that one of the young men that I had seen and I'd known, he'd been in and out of homelessness, knew a little bit about his background. He had a mother who was a drug addict, a dad who was in jail, being raised by his grandparents who really didn't want him in the first place. And they most especially didn't want him because when he came out to them in high school as being gay, and I never could quite figure out if they were throwing him out or he was running away because the conditions were so bad, but he kept bouncing in and out on the street. And I ran into him, it was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and hey, how are you doing? What's happening with you? And he said, well, I'm out on the street again. And he had a little duffel, little tiny duffel in his hand. So I got my stuff. I'm looking for a place to, I'm looking for a place to sleep. And I have had people tell me that God touched me. I've had people tell me that I went temporarily insane. But I prefer to think that, when confronted with something like that each of us has to take some kind of action. You don't have to take the action I took, but it was that I fished in my pocket, I pulled my house key out, I handed in the house key, and I said, here's my address, go let yourself in, get cleaned up, you can stay with us for a little while, until we find you something else. Just, go ahead. And then I went looking for my life partner to tell her what I had done. That was the really scary part. And that night we sat with him and we talked about what his options were, and that he could stay with us for 2 weeks because we were having house guests coming, and he could stay with us for 2 weeks, and we had to get in our guest room. But the goal was to get him into supportive housing. There was nothing there. And after 2 weeks, he was still there. And our house guest, who was staying with us for a couple of months, moved in, and he ended up moving out of the guest room and into our living room, sleeping on the floor. But we were determined that he was not going to stay with us. This was a temporary situation. A year later, we finally moved him out. And when he came to live with us, he was 16. Not long after he turned 17, and he had dropped out of high school. He had minimal life skills, and frankly was absolutely desperate for adult attention. He practically drove us crazy. He wanted so much. Just didn't even have to be nice to him. He just wanted to be with us all the time. And we worked over the course of that year, since we couldn't find an agency to deal with him or to take him by, so he was our problem, on trying to prepare him for adult life. Now, some of it was funny and very basic. Just, we taught him to cook, we taught him to do laundry, taught him how to hold a screwdriver. I think to this day he will not ever, he will pay somebody to, because, I'm the fix-it person. He was not interested in that. To issues of his beard started coming in. And I should point out that he's African American. And I didn't know what the hell to do with skin bumps. So I had to find someone. So there's some guys in the room nodding their heads. I had to go find African-American male friends that had that problem to teach him how to shave. And we helped him. I couldn't get him back to school, so the goal was to get him to where he could support himself. And he would get jobs, and we worked really hard on them. When you're supposed to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning, yes, you're there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and those kind of basic life skills things. And after a year, he had a job. We helped him rent an apartment. We furnished the apartment. We said, okay, you're on your own, sort of. It wasn't very far away, but you're on your own. And he lasted 6 months, and then he moved back. We said, you're here for 2 weeks. 6 months later, we found something that actually made the difference for him, and that is the Americorps program. So there's some, and yes, we've talked about that, the Americorps program. He happened to be in Serve Houston, which is the Houston version of the Americorps program, where he received a stipend to work with kids, work with, actually, with homeless, but it gave him structure, gave him support services. He was on his own, but not really because of that intense structure. He spent 2 years in the Americorps program, earned college scholarship money, decided that he wanted to be he wanted to be in some kind of a helping profession, and actually decided to go do some work in Brazil. He spent 3 months in Brazil working in a favela. Second really wonderful thing to happen in his life, because Serve Houston gave him the structure and more of a real job experience. Working in a favela showed him what real poverty was. He thought he had it bad, but that was a very humbling experience for him. And after 3 months, he came back, and of course he had to start all over again. And at that time we let it, it's only 2 weeks, but it was 3 months that time, and he was on his own. He is today 36. He has a career. He is a fine man. And if you do go to the city's website, you'll see a picture of our family, which is obviously a non-traditional family, and but it is a family of choice and a family created by love. But as part of all of this, I learned an awful lot about what is available for homeless youth and what's not, and what is possible for homeless youth and what's not. By extension, I began to be very interested in what is possible to address homelessness in general. When I came into office, I had some assets at hand. One of those assets was Buddy Grantham, my Veterans Affairs special advisor. So I knew a lot about the issue of homeless veterans. But I really wanted to do something beyond what we do through the police department, beyond what we've done in the sobering center, beyond what we do with our homeless courts, and beyond what we do through the housing department and the housing authority. And I'm glad to see so many from the housing authority here. I wanted to do something that wasn't what everybody else was doing, but could really make a difference. And so, my first term in office, we were in the midst of the recession and slogging through, hard to make new initiatives. But in January of 2012, when I took office for the second time, I put out into the universe that we were going to make a difference on homelessness in Houston, that that was my biggest priority in 2012 and 2013, and that I was going to be willing to ask for help anywhere and everywhere, and that I was going to make Houston a model for how we deal with homelessness if it were at all possible. There was a reference made, I believe, I don't know if it was Bob or Stephen Williams, talking about us going to HUD. When we went to HUD, I went to HUD and said, I don't know what else to do. I just need help. If you come down and you tell me to jump, I will say how high. Send your people down here. We're going to figure this out. I have no pride about this. I read news stories about how HUD was taking over the City of Houston Housing Department and all this. I didn't care. I wanted them down here, and I wanted them to look at what we were doing, look at where the gaps were, and help us figure out how to go forward, because obviously that the funding we received from the federal government was critical. Now, some of the things that we did, I think they were necessary and important. They weren't particularly, they weren't a whole lot of fun, and they weren't particularly politically wise, but the charitable food service ordinance was the right thing to do, and I'm glad that we did that. And I believe today that we have a better coordinated program for feeding the homeless across the City of Houston. And I appreciate all of those of you in this room who helped craft what our program was and help us move it forward. But other things that we have done haven't gotten the attention and are truly transformative. The fact that the City of Houston and the Housing Authority, Harris County Housing Authority, for the first time are working in concert with each other to provide the best housing and rapid rehousing, using every tool to put housing into the community, is a sea change. The fact that the City of Houston has worked with agencies across this city dealing with veterans, recognizing that we have not any greater role than anybody else, but we have a role, and what the City of Houston can do is be the linchpin that brings all of these other entities together, has made us, Stephen, I think, the best place in America to deal with housing veterans. You said one of the best, but Buddy and I are there on we're the best. And we've also, the selection of Mandy Chapman Simple as a special advisor to the mayor on homelessness. Yes, she's a special advisor to me, but her role is to make sure that wherever the city needs to intervene, we have the opportunity to do that. Whether that intervention is funding in a difficult funding environment, whether that intervention is mediating among agencies all doing good work but working in parallel with each other, or whether that intervention is what I talk about a lot to my internal staff, which is we have a lot of great organizations and we're all going in the same direction, but we're all operating in parallel. We never converge. We never add our strengths together. And so what we can do to help us converge on these problems, we're going to try to do that. Now, why is it so imperative that this happens now? Well, first, I have this limited window as mayor, and I'm going to move this issue forward. But if you go look at a picture of my family today, and you see my daughters who are now 12 and, or excuse me, now 17 and 22, they were 7 and 12, you might find out that our daughters, all formally and legally adopted, were part of a sibling group of 6. And their 4 brothers, the youngest was adopted, 3 of them now aged out of foster care. Not any of them can support themselves. Not any of them, those 3 boys, and they're beautiful boys, they cannot cope in the real world. My 22-year-old daughter and her boyfriend took in her younger brother, who has perhaps an 80 IQ. He aged out of the foster care system. Kid, you're on your own. And he comes in the evening and he works. He's a hard worker. He can do the same thing all day long in the same spot, but that's another story. But he comes in and he hands her his paycheck, and she makes sure that he has food and a place to stay. Without her, he would be under a bridge somewhere. And I know that every day there are more and more and more of those kids coming out of a system that we fund, completely unprepared for life. And we have a moral obligation to do something to make the prospects better for those kids. And this city will do everything possible to make their lives better and to make sure that no child coming out of a system that we fund ends up under a bridge someplace. So thank you.